Hi, everyone. This is Jo Massaro with Yahweh Sisterhood Book Club. And I have to tell you, I've done a lot of interviews over the past 10 or 15 years. And this is probably the most exciting one for me. And I mean that with all my heart, because we're going to be talking about a subject, a man who I think we may have known through a movie that we saw, but there was so much more to him. So I encourage you to stay with us and go to our YouTube channel, which is Jo Massaro, J-O Massaro, and check out all the other authors that we have had a privilege to interview. So we're so excited to have today with us Eva Marie Everson and Eric Eichinger. Eichinger.
Yep. It works.
Yes, it works. I would just love, we're going to be talking about this book, The Final Race, which is really the story of Eric Liddell. And like I said, you may know him from the movie Chariots of Fire, but I really want to get an opportunity to learn about each of our authors that are with us today, and then for them to share how this book really came about.
Okay.
Should I go first? Ladies first.
Ladies first, yes.
Well, I'm Eva Marie Everson, and in this little duo, I was lowercase e, because both of us have our first and last names with EE, so I'm lowercase e, and I'm the president of Word Weavers International. I'm a best-selling author, editor, speaker, and conference director. So just all of that rolled up into one person. I'm also a wife and a mother and a grandmother, and life is pretty good here in Central Florida.
Good.
And I am Eric Eichinger, and I am a pastor in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. I've been a pastor for about 15 years now. I'm on my second call. I'm in Bethel Lutheran in Clearwater. I am married, my wife Kara, I've got 3 kids, and I spend less time actually running and more times chasing after them these days. But I was a competitive runner at the Michigan State University, and I had a lot of success and joys there. I ended up being a missionary in China for a couple of years. And so in a number of ways, my life has sort of inadvertently paralleled Eric Liddell's, but he's always been very interesting for me from childhood. And so so just being able to combine a lot of the interests in my life and be able to help tell his story has been a real joy for me.
And let me just say that not many people know this, but many years ago, I actually used to do triathlons. So I would race, and so not in the way that obviously you guys would race, but I always had a heart for running, and I was always fascinated by people who would run, because that's how I actually started out as a runner.
Very cool. Very cool.
So tell us a little bit about how this book actually started, the idea behind it, and how the two of you came together.
Well, I was in China as a missionary there for a couple of years, and I had this week off during a spring holiday, and I knew that Eric Liddell had died in China, and then just loving the movie and watching it so many times, but then, because Eva, at the end of Chariots of Fire, there's that haunting line, Eric Liddell dies at the end of World War II and occupied China as a missionary. All of Scotland mourned. And so I've always thought, boy, that part of his story is so much more interesting, because you fall in love with Eric Liddell in the movie. So there I am in China, and I wanted to find where he was buried. There's no actual grave, but it was an old hospital where the internment camp actually was in the Weifang in the Shandong province. So I took it upon myself. I went up there and I found a monument that they don't know where his actual grave is, but there's a monument there. And so that was a real watershed, powerful moment for me. And I came back, and at that point I had made the decision I was going to be heading back to the States and going to seminary and becoming a pastor. So I'm in the seminary, and I'm starting to realize a lot of my running history, a lot of my love for China and my experience there. I ended up meeting my wife over there as well. And now I'm getting the theology at the seminary, but also in college, I was a theater major. And so the the theatrical and the film interest, all of that played a big role. And I said, I want to write a screenplay about Eric Liddell. So long story short, too late. I wrote a screenplay, and I was working at that for a number of years. And I met a mutual friend of Eva and mine's, Rebecca Seitz. And she was like, you really need to write the book version of this. So Eva, why don't you take it from there? Because I wrote a very freshman effort of a novel. So Eva, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think Rebecca read the first 3 chapters, and she called me and she said, I want to send you 3 chapters of a work that I think you would be interested in. But he's a screenplay writer. He's not a novelist. You're a novelist, and maybe you can help him. And so she ended up, teaming us together. And I worked with him as his editor on this project. And I told him, I said, Eric, this is so interesting because when Chariots of Fire released in 1981 here in America, they did screenings all over America, and they went into churches and they gave away free tickets. And, they just wanted to get a feel for how we were going to feel about this Scottish, runner who was a Chinese missionary, or a missionary in China, and that most of us had never really heard of. And so I had just had a baby, and I'm telling you, if you had given me a ticket to a mudslide, I would have gone. I was so ready to get out of the house.
I can understand that.
I was like, probably a couple of months into my daughter's life, and I was just ready to go anywhere. So, got the babysitter, went to the movies. I was like, Eric, there was that last line that it just stunned me. And I thought, wow, who was this man? And so I, went home and got the Encyclopedia Britannica out and read up on Eric Liddell. And so I told him, I said, yeah, I've always been fascinated with this guy, and I've read a couple of books about him. So, anyway, we just wrapped that up, and all was well. And I kept doing what I do, and Eric was doing what he does. And I guess about a year or 2 went by, and I got a call from my agent, and he said, hey, Tyndale, which is Tyndale Publishing, called, and they're working with this guy on a book about Eric Liddell, and they wanted it to be a biography, but they need a polished writer to come in, and somebody who's got fiction background, and I've done a couple of works of fiction for Tyndale. Because they wanted to read as if it is fiction, which was very confusing to Eric. It's like, you want a biograph? and so I'm thinking, wow, this sounds like Eric Eichinger's work. And so I said, well, who is the author? And he said, he's a pastor from Clearwater. His name is Eric Eichinger. And I said, I've already worked with Eric. I got the job, and we worked on this together. And Eric found out just how much fun it can be.
Oh, yeah.
All about the editing process.
Oh, yes.
Editing process.
Yep.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, Eric would say, that they would ask something else of us. Well, reshape this, redo that, rewrite this, edit that, add this, subtract that. And Eric would say, is this normal? Yeah, it is.
Yeah, you think you've done something, you've written it, okay?
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
And then you're like, what is all this? It's like rewriting it all over again.
Yep.
So when I was reading the book, which I will say again how much I so love this book. And obviously there was a lot of research that was put into this. Maybe you could share, because I think Janet McHenry.
Yes.
Yes, okay. So I always post, is there a question you want to ask the authors? And her question was exactly like mine. Tell us about the research and what you had to go through in order to put this book together. So
start with Eric on that one, because he was the research king on this one.
Well, I mean, obviously you have this big introduction with him with the whole Chariots of Fire. So a lot of people have that understanding with him. One of the things I've always heard, and I think a lot of people do, is write what you know. And so I was able from my own experience of living in China for a couple of years, also teaching students in China for a couple of years,
Mhm.
and even a little bit of dating and finding my wife in China, and who is American. We were around the same, I should say that. But then also studying seminary and theology and running. So there were so many different areas of my personal life that I could breathe life into that with experience and such. I also got to meet two of Eric's three daughters and talk with them personally one-on-one, and we got to have a meal together, and we interviewed them in their apartment a few years ago. And then I spoke with the youngest one on the phone as well. So I've had a number of correspondence with them up in Toronto, but then also we went over to Scotland, and I actually got to run on the beach where they filmed that famous scene with them running on the beach there in St. Andrews. And we went, there's the Eric Liddell Center in Scotland, and it's the Church of Old Morningside, and they've got the whole Eric Liddell Center there. So met with some of Eric's extended nieces there, and they gave us a lovely tour around the city of some of Eric's old haunts. And so a lot of that was there. But then obviously there's a number of books out there with different expertise and angles with Eric Liddell's other books and writings. Eric's got his own book that he's written as well, Disciplines of the Christian Life. So there you really get to see inside of his mind and his theology. And so having a master's of divinity and being a pastor, just kind of unpacking that and bringing that into more terms for the laity was a real joy. And then that brilliant Day of Discovery video too with Eric, David McCaslin was a tremendous. So, but Eva did as well tons of grunt work research as well.
Well, my job was to make sure his research was right. So, that's part of the job that I was brought into. So, that I would fact check is basically what it is. And you just cannot fact check anything on Eric Liddell without just becoming enmeshed in this man's life. And I just felt like I knew him when we were done. I felt like, I don't know, like he was my grandfather or something, that I had done this research on a man who his life was somehow connected with mine. I have the joy of talking to the oldest daughter on the phone. I wanted to, talk to her as well as just having all this research laid out. There are many of his letters that are accessible. And so being able to dig into those and feeling like you were getting to know him a little bit more. After the book was published, I had the opportunity to then go to Edinburgh, Scotland, and go into the Eric Liddell Center. And I remember that moment because there's a place in the book where it talks about, is it called Five Corners, Eric, where it's like this place where all these churches meet. It's like every corner there's a church.
Yeah. Four corners, yeah.
Four Corners is 5 Points in Atlanta. I just got the two confused. So Four Corners, and I'm standing outside of the Eric Liddell Center, and it was like something about this. The name of this street is very familiar to me, and I'm looking. I'm like, look, there's a church. There's a church. There's a church, and then all of a sudden it hit me. Oh my gosh, I am standing in the middle of Four Corners that I wrote about, and. So anyway, went into the Eric Liddell Center, wanted to gift, Eric Eichinger had signed the book, and I had signed a book, and I wanted to take one that was, doubly signed by both of us into there. And they said, oh, and I told them who I was. Oh, wait, the head guy, can't think of his name, Scottish guy, but he didn't want to meet you. And I think his name was John. And
he's in that video that you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, I had to come. I had to come back. So we did a little shopping, and then I came back and I got to meet with him, and he was so delightful talking with him about Eric. But the thing I loved the most was I was staying at a place called Angel Share Hotel in Edinburgh, and I walked in, and right when you walk in and you just turn, and there's the the reception desk, there is a huge portrait of Eric Liddell coming across the finish line. I literally gasped when I saw it. And I thought, this is crazy, you know, that I get to be in this city where he lived for so long. And it just, I mean, you take that and then you take the book and it's all just coming to life.
Yeah. I had the goosebumps as you were talking. Let's talk about China when Eric is small, because that's not something that we hear about, you know, in the movie or anything like that. So his parents were obviously in China at the time, I believe, when he was born, and his brother. So and they were there by was it the London Missionary Society? Yep. Yes. Okay.
Right. Well, yeah, it's too bad, because even I had written, a good extra quarter of the book was his, you know, growing up years, and so that was in there, more of that, and probably they cut more of the boarding school days, I think. But again, there's another whole book out there that even I could maybe sell on the black market here. I don't know. But anyway,
the deleted version.
Yeah, but essentially, yeah, in China, so Eric Liddell's parents were both missionaries there, and so they were actually in the same town, Xiaojiang, which is where Eric and his brother Rob ended up working, sort of under the banner of the Red Cross in the hospital during the Sino-Japanese War. So they're right in the very town, in the village where they were kids together. So a lot of times people don't quite realize that. And yeah, I think Eric was maybe about 4 years old when they came back to Scotland. So and then they get to see you know, this homeland that they've never been to before, but that the adults talk about, you know. So but they had a wonderful Chinese, I would not a maid. What's the word I'm looking for, Eva?
I can't remember. They have a certain title.
They do have a certain title to it. But,
yeah, it's almost like a nana or something.
Like a nanny, something. Yeah. So, but not tons of kids around. But they, you know, he and his brother and their younger sister Jenny, they would get in a lot of fun with the Chinese kids and the nanny there.
Yeah, and you know what was shocking for me though, as a mom, was that when they went to Scotland, it was basically to take the boys to boarding school.
Yeah.
And it was, you know, we're dropping you off and we won't see you again for 7 years.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That for me was so stunning. And in fact, as we worked on the project, I said to Eric, you know, for the majority of his life, he was alone.
Yeah.
He really was. I mean, he had Rob, and then, you know, and that was all well and good, but he was separated from his mom and his dad, his sister, his younger brother. And then Rob went to college, and there was enough, you know, years of difference there. But that was kind of Eric's blooming time because Rob was, I think, the better athlete. And it's just that's not what he pursued. And so once Rob was in college or university, then Eric's light began to shine brighter. And so then, you know, Rob makes a decision, I'm going back to China, which left Eric in the UK alone. And then, you know, when he makes this decision to go back to China as an adult, they all came back to Scotland. So, you know, and then even he meets Florence, and her father says, well, she's going to Canada for like 4 years or something like that to study nursing. So he was separated from her. Then they finally get married, and he takes a job where in missionary work where he's gone from home all the time.
Yeah.
So it, you know, and then they realize they're about to be occupied, and he puts Florence and the girls on a boat and says, get back to Canada. And there he is alone again. And I think that I think maybe one of the reasons Eric's faith was so strong was because it had been him and God for so long.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so although he was alone, he was never alone.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that very fascinating about him.
Yeah, I think one of the themes that you see throughout is obviously the fact that they are leaving each other is so many times, and that the loneliness that was there. But I think it even speaks into our life today that, you know, we're never really alone.
No
matter what our situation may be. and no matter how difficult it may be. And obviously Eric is a true, and not only Eric, but, I mean, Flo, had to, she was pregnant at the time when he put her on this boat. And even doing those kind of things at the time, one of the questions I wanted you to talk about was actually traveling in those days and having to travel back and forth, and with boats and with the war going on, that was not an easy situation. And what happened to them one time when they were on the boat together, all of them.
Yeah, Eric, talk about that. That was frightening just to write about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's fascinating because when I moved to China, email was only, a few years old now. So, I mean, I didn't have email until college. And so a few years after that, I'm in China. But before that, I mean, communication is slower. Travel is much slower. So yeah, he did the Trans-Siberian Railway, and that was like a 2 or 3 week experience to get from where he was in England all the way to China. But then the boats, particularly, when the wartime sessions would occur, the submarines, and it's just a completely different mindset with a global war. And okay, a certain percent of us just aren't going to make it there, and that's just understood, and they have children. So but they really wrestled with, well, if this is God's will and this is where I'm being led to go, and to be with, there were a number of times where, well, Florence is there and Eric is here, and the kids are here and such. So, but they felt like, well, we need to be together. And so if we're in God's will, we're in God's will.
Yeah.
But there's a particular, Eva, why don't you tell the story with the dud submarine,
What I was thinking about was we were, and then you can tell that story, but I was thinking about the fact that they were separated so much that he came home late one night and kind of surprised Florence. And the next morning, it would have been Maureen.
Oh,
right?
yes.
Heather. Yeah, she came running in and jumped in the bed with, she supposed her mother, and there's her father. And she says, "Who is this, the cook?" So of course Eric made a joke out of it, but it just goes to show you how few and far between they were able to see each other.
I'm remembering too, one of the things Patricia said, and that's Eric's oldest daughter. Mm-hmm. It's really hard for us in our present day context to consider all the things that they went through, because it doesn't always compute. But Patricia's like that lifestyle of the separation, it's just, that's what you did then. And so there wasn't so much as there would be today of just the questions and concerns and eye rolls of that. It's just, that was the lifestyle. And so he wasn't that outside of the normalcy, even though, emotional, to be sure.
Yeah, I think
also, I remember when we were working on the project, and Florence and the girls were gone, and they are now living kind of in a lockdown situation, like they are hemmed in, and everybody's kind of having to move in with everybody else so that they can just keep everyone almost in a quarantine type situation, although they're not contagious or anything, but it was like, we got to know where you are at all times. Yep. And I thought, man, that would be horrible to live like that. And then, thinking, I don't know if I could do that. And yet here we are, a couple of years later, and we are kind of in that same situation. I've often questioned, and I think, Jo, you and I talked about this with The One True Love of Alice Ann, could our young people today, if they had to do what some of the young people of Eric's day were doing, what they sacrificed, what they gave up, could they do it? And really, when you look at it, like Eric just said, for them it was normal. Okay, this is what we have to do. This is what we're going to do, and you don't fight against it. You just do it because it's for the betterment of everyone. It's what you're expected to do.
Right.
His amazing sacrifices, it just blew me away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me just pop up. I'm going to change my screen and I'm going to look a little wacky in it, but I want to just pop up a couple of those photos that I have. Let me just get rid of this on my end. So we obviously see Eric when he's running, and then by his hair, I'm presuming he's a little older there.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
If you think about it, Eric didn't live to be very old.
That's true, because if you look at his let me get out of the way. If you look at his wedding picture, you see his hair, or lack thereof, right there.
Lack thereof, yeah.
Yeah, and then I think I move the one out of the side there a little bit, but this is Flo with the children.
That's the picture he got while he was in.
Yeah. So when he was, what would they call it? Internment?
Internment.
Yeah.
Internment. Yeah. So this was the picture that he received, because he had never met, what's the youngest, Maureen?
Yep.
He had never met Maureen because Flo was pregnant when they left. So let me just change my background again. Yep.
Just
okay. Yeah. Maybe we could go back a little bit, because I want to talk about what happens in Chariots of Fire, because for some people, they may not really know about that Olympic part and what the decision that he made and what happened after that. So maybe we could talk about that a little bit.
Well, so Chariots of Fire depicts in a very dramatic fashion that Eric's going to the Olympics. He is the heavily favored to win the 100 meters. He's on the boat heading to the Olympics, and then word comes that the preliminary race is going to be on a Sunday. And so now Eric is portrayed on the back of the ship in this angst-ridden moment of trying to decide what he's going to do. In reality, he knew about 9 months prior that the 100 was going to fall on the Sunday and such. And so there was no magical character, Lindsay, that gave the 400 race to him to whatnot. He intentionally decided he wasn't going to run the 100, and then he also made the decision to start training for the 400, which still, the country was you're a shoo-in to win in the 100. You're dim hopes at best, to qualify in the 400. So good luck with that. So I actually think it's more dramatic when you look today at a lot of the cancel culture and the pressure of the mob that gets put on people with the media, because it was all written in the media and the newspapers then. I think it's more dramatic that he weathered that storm and those fires to get to the point of the Olympics the way it actually happened.
Yeah, that's something that Eric and I. Yeah, that's something Eric and I jumped on too, was that he was so ridiculed. I mean, he was their golden boy.
Right.
He went from the golden boy to the most despised man in England. I mean, they just, because it's like, we forget, they were just coming out of World War I. And they had, just been practically bombed to death. And so now there's this sense of, oh, look at us, and he's our ticket. And then he says, no, I'm not going to run the 100. I'll run the 400. Of course, they thought he was crazy. You're doing this as a publicity stunt. They tried to get him to, fudge, because he was saying, I'm not going to run on Sunday. That's the Lord's day. Well, what if you don't run until this time of the day? Or what if you pray on Saturday and just give God Saturday and not, they were just anything and everything. He was like, no, he was so firm in his faith. No, I will not run. And I don't even think that his friend, it was D.P. Thompson.
DP.
I don't think he even knew how to advise Eric on this, because so much was writing on it. But Eric would not falter. And I don't know a whole lot about running. I walked a lot of 5K races, but I didn't run them. And, but I do know that to go from a 100-meter runner to a 400-meter runner is in itself a quite a decision to make. It required him to push himself beyond the limits that he had ever pushed himself. But he was willing to do that for his faith. And I think that speaks volumes.
Now, I'm trying to find, when he gets on I think it's the train to go, if I have this correct, he says something to the people that are standing there.
Mhm.
And I can't find, it's in my notes somewhere. I can't find it, but I don't know if anybody remembers it.
Well, I think it's something about Christ for the nations, and the nations for Christ or something.
Yeah,
Something like that.
that's it. Yeah. And so his whole mindset was whatever he was going to do, it was going to be for the glory of God. And that's what he wanted. So
and
he
we
gets there.
have a Facebook page, The Final Race, and you can go there and you can actually see some of the videos of Eric running, and also just notice how humble he was at the very end. I mean, he knew he had to stand there. This was before they, you got your medal in the mail. This is before they put you up on the podium. So, but he knew he had to stand there for a moment, a couple of shots, but you can kind of see, I mean, he's very humble, shaking hands with people, but you get the sense that he's looking for, like, where's the nearest exit? I just came to run and now I'm going, it's again, that you actually get to see him run that race.
Mm-hmm.
You get to see him win the Olympics and run in such a way that he just tears the records out of frame.
Mm-hmm.
So it's The Final Race, the Facebook page, just so for people to know. Okay.
Yes.
All right. He obviously in running the race, I don't know if I have this right. Did he do the 400 and the 200 when he was there, or do I have that wrong?
No, that's correct. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, he wins the gold in the 400, but he wins the bronze in the 200. But they didn't, nobody was writing home about that a whole lot in the press. They were like, big whoop, let's see the gold medal. So, yeah, because he won the 200, or excuse me, he placed in the 200 before the 400, but it wasn't, it was just a reluctant shrug from the nation, it seemed.
Yeah. And
if it had been the other way around, it would have never flown.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about that he was also in the outside lane. You want to share a little bit about that?
Well, the outside lane in track, particularly in a sprint, or particularly the 400, it's the worst position to be, because one of the things that pushes you on is being able to see your opponents and run next to them and to see their pacing and their speed and how they're feeling and stuff. So if you're in the outside lane with the curves, you can't, because of the staggered start, you can't see, they're all behind you. So it's just you running, and you're just, sensing them coming up and whatnot. So you can't play off of them at all.
And talk about his, I would call it a very unique running style.
Yeah, so he had this way of running, is described like a wild animal. And so he didn't have the most fluid gait to his stride. His arms were very powerful. And then his head, of course, would be flipped back, kind of in that just God in control and just running. So, in Chariots of Fire, he didn't actually say this, but in the film, he's often quoted as saying that as, when I run, I feel his pleasure.
Yeah.
So, and those words really capture how he ran.
Yeah.
Well, one of my favorite stories is that after Chariots of Fire came out, Florence went to see the premiere, and she commented how like Eric, the actor, was, who played her husband. Mm-hmm. And she, but why did you have him running like that? And they said, well, Flo, that was the way he ran. His arms were flailing, his head would go back, and the man who was, I guess, the creator of the movie, I can't think of his name, Lord somebody. He was a Lord, wasn't he, Eric? Yeah. Lord somebody. I heard him speaking on this. And he said she became very indignant, and she said, Eric ran like a god. She couldn't see it. Yeah.
I think too, because they I think it's David Putnam. David Putnam.
Yes, David Putnam. Yes.
And
Yeah.
so he said, like, that's funny because we really felt the way the actor ran,
Yes.
really, that was like the thing we felt best about.
Yeah.
I guess you're not going to please everybody.
Well, and and another interesting thing too, Eric is always portrayed with this thick Scottish brogue accent.
Mhm.
However, because he was raised in the English boarding school, his accent was probably much more of an English British sound than really the Highlands of Scotland. However, the legend and the lore continues to grow. So they're like, the Chariots of Fire people are like, nope, it's Scottish all the way. Don't
It's
change
got to be
it.
Scottish. Yeah.
I think I found the quote that I was looking for. I think this is the one. It's Christ for the world needs Christ.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
it.
and if you think about it, I mean, he was still in college. After he won the Olympics, he had to go back to
22 or
graduate.
23, somewhere around there.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, and he became such an icon, and it really could have just asked for the world and gotten it and gave all that away. Because people flocked to see him. And I know one of the things that excited me was the fact that Peter Marshall had gone to, he was just a kid working in the coal mines, and he went to one of these events where Eric was speaking and heard him and had that life-changing moment afterward. And of course, came to the United States and became the great pastor that he was. And of course, we know Catherine Marshall, who wrote Christy, his wife, and A Man Called Peter, and the movie A Man Called Peter. I don't know, I was in DC a couple of years ago and just walking, and I saw the church where Peter Marshall was the pastor, and again I had that moment of, had it not been for Eric Liddell, Peter Marshall would not have been in that church, and Peter Marshall would not have been basically the pastor to the United States of America. And I think Eric touched more lives than he will ever know. This side of heaven, maybe he knows that side of heaven, but just in what I know about Eric Liddell, he doesn't care. I mean, he cares, but it's like, it's all for Jesus. It was all for Jesus. So it's not about me, it's about him.
That's what as you're reading through these pages, you recognize that that's exactly what it is for him. It's all about Jesus.
Yeah, and totally. And I mean this from my heart. Working on this project changed my walk with Christ.
Well, that was going to be one of my questions for you guys. So do it right there. Go ahead.
Well, go ahead, Eva. Go ahead. Yeah.
Take it, lowercase e. It just changed my life, and it changed my walk. And I actually was asked to give a keynote right as the book came out, and the keynote was the title of it was The Book That Changed My Life. And it wasn't a book that I read, it was a book that I wrote, or co-wrote with Eric. And it just, I don't know. I'll say this and try not to cry. I can't tell you how many nights I sat at this desk and I just wept. I wept because if you ever think you cannot exemplify Christ, here was a life, just one life that said, yes, you can. If you think that you're not Christ with skin on, here was a life that said, yes, you are. And I certainly would never say, I want to be more like Eric Liddell. I would say I want to be more like Christ.
Right.
But the stories that Eric Eichinger uncovered and brought to this project, and then I got to take all the was's and the wers out of, the passive voice out of.
That would be me.
I did. I sent Erica an email and I said, if you use was one more time, over there.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, but I would weep for this man who was just so willing to give everything.
Yes.
Everything for Christ. His wife, his children, his family, his fame, his fortune, everything. And I mean, it would have been so easy to argue, well, if I stay here in Great Britain, I can preach and preach and preach and preach and preach.
Mhm.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
And, you know, I can have my cake and eat it too. And I'm in all this comfort. But no, I know God is calling me back to China.
Mhm.
And so there he goes. And even that wasn't an easy trip. And like Eric mentioned a moment ago, and then he gets there and his family says, oh, we're moving back to, you know, Scotland. So he was just Jesus with skin on, you know. He was one of the greatest people that ever walked the face of this earth.
I would just add with all of Eva what she said. One of the most difficult things writing about Eric Liddell is trying, you know, with a character story arc flow. Every character needs to have a fatal flaw, and it's hard digging up dirt on him to make him more human, because he was, you know. And so but I mean, and there are a few things there, you know, and you don't want to expose all of that such. So there we found a couple little things, but essentially though, yeah, it's just he got it done a lot better and cleaner than a lot of us do.
Yeah.
So
well, it was amazing because there's that one thing that he went to like a Bible study or something, and the man who was heading it up kind of called him on a character flaw, on a spiritual character flaw.
Mm-hmm.
And Eric denied it. It's like, that's not true. And then he went back home, and of course it ate at him, you know, like a boil on his behind.
Mm-hmm.
And he had to go back to the man.
Like a whale on his behind.
Yeah. And
write that one down.
I know.
I need to write that down too.
Yeah. A friend of mine yesterday said, the graveyard of bad ideas. And I wrote it down on my calendar. I thought that's such a great line. But you know, of course, and the man he spoke with would never divulge what it was. I mean, that was, you know, like a pastor parishioner privilege. But of course, Eric and I debated what it might be. So, what do you think? You know, but at least, you know, he had a flaw. Yeah.
Well, let me just tell you about my journey in reading this, because I have to tell you that there were tears flowing as I'm reading it, and I am probably going to cry. So, you know, I am, you know, in a few months, I'm going to be 70. And I feel like my life is really just starting. Mm-hmm. I feel like that God has a plan and that I want to follow it. And I mess up and I don't always get to the place where, you know, I should be. But my heart is to strive the very best that I can. And in reading this book, I really felt like my love of the Lord just increased.
Yeah.
And my desire to serve him increased even more. And if you think it can't, it can. Mm-hmm. And I am so forever grateful when I say that this was the most meaningful book for me to have read. And I've read a lot, and I've interviewed you on yours. So, you know what I'm saying. I loved your book, but this was life-changing, this book.
Wow.
And I just encourage everybody to get a copy of this. And I've only read it once, but I will be reading it again.
Yeah. Let me just say the Tyndale had it has his audio version. Mm-hmm. And I don't know the voice actor. I'd never heard of the voice actor who read it, but good heavenly day, he was good. He read it with just the right impact. And one of the things that I noticed is that when Eric was young, he was reading at a fairly clipped pace. Mm-hmm. And then as he got older, it was slowing down. And then at the end of his very short life, you know, he was just taking his time with it. And I thought, man, that is that is brilliant on this guy's part, but it was so well done that I got my copy and I listened to it over and over and over again. And even though I was part of the project, I would hear things. I go, oh, I forgot about that, And I think it is one of those books you can read more than once, and you're going to pull something out of it every time that you didn't catch the time before.
Yeah, I'm going to listen to it the next time I do. I really want to hear that. And you mentioned the book that he wrote earlier. I actually downloaded it on my Kindle the other day. And I was sitting out on our deck this morning with my husband having coffee. And I said, let me read something to you. And I was reading it and he was like, oh my God. He goes, I love that so much that I want this book now. And I want to use it in what I'm doing. And just the words, you can tell that it is from a man who truly, truly, truly loves God and truly wants to serve him and truly wants others to serve, to know the Jesus that he's talking about. Yeah.
And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Eric, but didn't he write the majority of that while they were kind of interned, but not yet in Wei Shen?
I think he had started it
right
while he was still in not the university circuit, but the teaching college in China.
Right.
Okay.
And then I think a little bit of the back and forth when he's in the mission field. But then, I think Flo and the girls go back, and then they're locked in. So they're not quite in the prison camp yet, but he's pretty much done with it, and he's trying to send it out to different people for just, the benefit of reading it and stimulating their faith and such. So, I think he only maybe had a couple years of distribution attempts with that, but still he finished it, and it was a real passion project of his, definitely.
It does lead you to the question. And I know I talked to Patricia about this. Like, wouldn't God have been served so much better if he had let Eric live?
Mm-hmm.
What was that purpose of, right before the release of Wei Shen, that he dies? And that's one of those questions that only God is going to answer. Because you could imagine, like, well, wouldn't he have done this and wouldn't he have done that? And yet, at the same time, I think the fact that he packed so much into a short life makes it even more impacting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that those were some of the questions that I had. Why did he have to die? Obviously, so young, and what would God have done in his life? As he. Because it wasn't very long. What was it? Once the war ended, he dies, and so they say that he had a brain tumor. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yes, and so that is why he dies in the camp. But it wasn't that long, maybe 4, 5, 6 months, I think, if I remember correctly, that you said that. Then, the Americans come.
Yeah, they were liberated.
Yeah.
So
but
I think
even the Japanese cried.
What's that?
I said even the Japanese cried when he died.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Go ahead.
I think even another accent of that tragedy is I think he dies in February of 45.
Yes. That's right.
And then the war ends early summer. But then Flo and everybody, they don't find out until I think a month after the news of the war was over, and so just, then it's been like, 4, 5, 6 months before they finally get word, and just, oh, the war's over and great, it's going to be great. And then, oh my goodness.
Because she received, the day he died, he mailed 2 letters to her.
Right.
And she received the letters almost at the same time, or at the same time as she received the news that he was dead, or, like maybe vice versa.
I think it was a while.
And then got the letters.
Yeah, I think it was a while afterwards, and I think it was actually 3 letters that you said.
Okay.
But because you show the letters, you can read the letters, but it was. I mean, can you imagine? I'm sitting there and I'm crying my head off, imagining, all that she must be feeling. It was, and let me just say,
Eric, if we don't write the last chapter, can he still be alive?
Well, I do include that baptismal paragraph in there about the resurrection of the dead and the hope that we have as Christian, so I do try to give that positive end, twist there because of his Christian faith and ours and anyone. So
Yes. Okay. Anything else you want to add about the book? And let me just say this first. We've talked a lot about different things, but you really need to read the book because there's so much. It's like all this meat that's in there and you don't want to miss a slice of it. You really do not. So if you want to share anything else, and make sure you give us how people can connect with you.
Well, I have my website, ericeichinger.com. And so if they go to that, there's a couple of YouTube things there, so you can actually see me interviewing Eric Liddell's daughters and some of our trips that we documented to Scotland and to Toronto to interview them. But also, I have the book is available, to purchase through that website, and I'll sign a personal note and personalize it for you or whoever wants to, that you want to give it to.
Nice, that's beautiful.
And I'm at EvaMarieEversonAuthor.com. EvaMarieEverson.com is a name squatter.
Yes.
And you have to put author at the end of it. And also, it just dawned on me, I need to do this. And I will do this right after we're done. I need to upload some of those photographs that I took in Edinburgh
Yes.
to the final race at Facebook. That particular site, so you can see like this is the area where he was, and the four squares and that kind of thing. So
oh yeah, I'd love to see those. So normally I ask them other questions, but I'm not going to because I honestly don't think that they matter because they're not about Eric. They're not about Eric. And other than, what are you reading right now, I guess would be a good question, because I'd be interested to know. And I know when I asked Eva that, there was a long list of things. But, and if you have a bucket list, what's on it for you, or what do you see might be the next step in your journey?
Well, I'm actually writing my sophomore effort of a book right now. So I've got a contract with CPH, Concordia Publishing House, which is the publishing entity of the Lutheran Church. And so I'm writing a book about it's Jesus and how essentially a lot of our hero modern mythology and ancient mythology really comes from that narrative of Christ. And so I'm having fun drawing that out. For example, like, why do in all of our hero stories, the hero will die and then they magically come back to life? Where does that come from? So I'm having fun drawing a lot of that. So a lot of my reading is in researching that with different commentaries and sources there. So and so bucket lists, yeah, it's fun to see. I originally started to try to make a movie about Eric Liddell. And so that's still what I have out there. And God continues to open doors here and there with the writing of the final race and now another opportunity I have. But yeah, so that's still one of my passion projects is to try to get that film made. So.
Yeah, I actually have been thinking about that as I read the book, that this really deserves to be a movie.
Yeah, and a factual one, because there was a movie that came out right as we were working on the project, and it's not factual. They took God out of his life, and you can't do that.
No.
Not good.
No.
So anyway, and it's so lovely that Chariots of Fire did focus on that that zeroing in point. One of the epiphanies that I had when I was doing my research was discovering that one of the people who fronted the money for Chariots of Fire was Dodi Al-Fayed. It was pretty fascinating, but I was like, wow, who knew? But I just got through reading a thriller, and so I finished it last night. And I about a week ago went to a thrift store and just bought a whole bunch of books on the thrift store shelf. I love doing that. And so I just grabbed the next one in the stack today, and it's For One More Day by Mitch Albom.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I'm about 1 or 2 chapters in, and I'm going, I think I've read this already. So I'm not sure what my next book is going. I will go ahead and finish this one because it'll take about 5 minutes to read it. It's very short, as most Mitch Albom books are, but it's very well done. And then I just signed a contract for my next novel, which is finished. I wrote it. It took me 2.5 years to write it.
Wow.
And, I wouldn't contract for it until it was done. I didn't want anybody to rush me on it. It is probably the hardest novel I've ever written because it has so many layers. It's like an onion, and I didn't want to be rushed. And so that will come out in March. It's called Dust, and it was inspired by the song by Carrie Livgren, Dust in the Wind.
Dust in the Wind. Oh, wow. That's great. Well, I just actually, let me just write this down so I don't forget what the title is. That's what I was looking at. Sorry. I should know it off the top of my head, but I did not. It's called Colliding with the Call.
That sounds good.
By Corella Roberts.
Mm-hmm.
You can call her Cora. She actually, her and her husband were missionaries in Alaska, and then went to Thailand, and that's where they are right now. And that was a really wonderful read. She's so sweet. And so I was 9 o'clock Monday morning, and she was 8 o'clock Monday night Thailand time.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the last book that I've read. So I've got a pile, as usual, sitting.
Yes.
That I need to get through. So, okay, Eric, maybe you can. I want to ask this question, and because I think that Eric Liddell would have something to say about the world today. And if there is something you think, obviously this is something you may feel, that he would say to the world today, honestly, what do you think that might be?
Well, he was always one that was compassion was always at the forefront of his mind, I think, in terms of helping other people and such. And I think with a lot of the tension that there is in society, and particularly, he is in the midst of the war and not wanting to use a gun, and he had a couple opportunities to do that. And so always thinking about, all of these people are God's children. And so they are, creations of God. And so how can we show love and compassion in that? Now, on the other side of the coin, he would speak truth. He would not kowtow to different pressures and such either. So he would hold fast, as we know, to his Christian convictions. So one of the quotes, I think, Florence, his wife, marveled at how Eric could say things in a group of people that could really irk them, or they would have sometimes a hostile reaction, but he would stay very the soothing tone to him. So she always marveled that he could do that. And I think that's just being at peace with that God-controlled life, as sometimes it's described. So I think mindful of compassion for other people, holding to his values and beliefs, despite the pressures that might come either socially, globally, politically, or what have you.
I so agree. Again, I have been honored to have both of you with me today. And for those of you who are listening on the replay, I'm Jo Massaro with Yahweh Sisterhood Book Club. You can find us at just that, YahwehSisterhoodBookClub.com, or go to our YouTube station, which is Jo Massaro, and you'll be able to see, I think there's about 30 videos up there right now of different authors. So we thank you for joining us, and we look forward to the next time we get together.
All right.